Everybody ready?
All right.
Okay, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us on this lovely Friday afternoon. And this is the event called Blended Learning. And this is sponsored by the Center for Innovative Teaching and Learning and the Office of Instructional Consulting in the School of Education at Indiana University, Bloomington. Today we are very honored to have as our featured speaker coming in virtually from Brigham Young University is Charles Graham. He's an associate professor of instructional psychology and technology and has an interest in technology-mediated teaching and learning. He studies the design and evaluation of blended learning environments and the use of technology to enhance teaching and learning. He's authored articles in over 24 journals, and he's published work related to online and blended learning environments and edited books, including Online Collaborative Learning, Theory and Practice, Blended Learning, Research Perspectives, the Encyclopedia of Distance Learning, and the AECT Handbook of Research on Educational Communications and Technology. Charles also co-edited with Kurt Bonk here the Handbook of Blended Learning, Global Perspectives, Local Designs, which contains 39 chapters with examples of blended learning in higher education, corporate, and military contexts from around the world. He is currently co-editing a volume titled Blended Learning, Research Perspectives 2, with 21 chapters on current research practices in blended learning. And I have to say we're very proud of Charles because he's a graduate of Indiana University in the Instructional Systems Design Department. So at this point, we will now introduce the three Indiana University panelists. And Greg Searing, who is the director of Center for Innovative Teaching and Learning, will do that.
I just have to look and know how far I need to step on, but without stepping in front of Paul.
Right.
That's fine. I want to thank everybody, of course, for being here today, both the panelists and the attendees. I want to first introduce Paul Graf. Paul is a lecturer in the IU Bloomington Department of Economics. He's been teaching here for 5 years, and he's developed E201 and 202, which are macro and macro, I think, respectively, for an online setting. And he received a summer instructional development fellowship to do at least one of those courses, I remember. And if I remember correctly, too, part of the reason for doing the macro and the micro courses was because there was really high demand courses. Yes. And so that really fits in with what we're talking about today in terms of goals of blended learning. And he's been teaching those courses for over 2 years, and he's teaching the E201 again this spring semester. So thank you, Paul. Michael Morrone is an award-winning senior lecturer. He's won several teaching awards in the Kelley School of Business, where he teaches business communication, and he also teaches seminars in Kelley's popular LAMP, Liberal Arts Management Program, which, as a parent of an IU graduate, I must say, has come in handy. One of my LAMP graduate children is fully employed. Both of them are employed, but only one went through LAMP. Michael's known for incorporating technology and blended learning models to enhance both student communication and collaboration in his courses. And he's a member of IU's Faculty Colloquium on Excellence in Teaching and also a member of Bloomington Faculty Council. And I believe you also have a side gig with UITS as a faculty liaison as well. I have. So thank you, Michael. And finally, we have Kurt Bonk. And Kurt is from the School of Education here at IU Bloomington, and he's researched and published on blended learning in a variety of environments, K-12, higher education, corporate, and military settings over the years. He's conducted national and cross-cultural studies about blended learning. And Kurt's known for giving hundreds of keynote presentations on blended learning in countries all over the world, Saudi Arabia, Korea, Australia, China, Thailand. So he's very well traveled representing IU in terms of distance education, blended learning. And he's written several books which detail blended learning models, including the one that you had already mentioned, the co-edited volume in 2006 with Charles. So thank you all for being here, and I'll turn it back over to Karen to start us off.
Okay. I also wanted to welcome the folks that are joining us virtually and to invite you to give us your questions via email, and that address would be ic@gmail.com. And we will be monitoring the email and presenting the questions to the speaker and the panelists. So feel free to fire off the questions. And again, that's ic@gmail.com. And so I think we'll turn this over to you, Charles. Thank you so much.
Well, first, I guess I just want to say it's a pleasure to be able to participate with you. I mean, Kurt is a mentor and friend. Really grateful for how he's helped to guide me in my work with blended learning. And Karen, you were one of the first people that I worked for at Indiana University over a decade ago. So brings back great memories to see you again. I'm, of course, a little bit older and balder now, so Karen asked me to do a brief presentation to start the panel discussion to kind of set the groundwork for blended learning and overview some of the models and some of the challenges that are being faced with blended learning right now. So I'm going to do that and try and do it quite quickly so that we can spend most of the time in the panel discussion. So the first question I want to address is, what is blended learning? There's a lot of discussion out there right now about this question and the nuances of the question. In essence, when I talk about blended learning, I say simply blended learning combines face-to-face instruction with computer-mediated or online instruction. If you look at the spectrum of blended learning that's shown here in this graph, on one end we have traditional face-to-face learning where there's no online components. On the other end, we have our completely online learning. And there's this whole series of things in the middle. Some things people call technology enhanced, some that are mostly online with a little bit of maybe a face-to-face orientation like the IST program had many years ago. And the nuance comes where different institutions call blended learning different things. So what's in the middle here of this chart, where there's some reduction in face-to-face class time, almost everyone refers to that as blended learning. But sometimes institutions refer to the technology-enhanced instruction as blended, and sometimes they also refer to the mostly online as blended. So here's a good example. A few years ago, about a decade ago now, the Pew Center did some provided grants for 30 institutions to create courses that were to reduce cost and improve effectiveness. And this graph here shows how those courses, actually did that. And if you look here, everything in the middle are courses that combined online with face-to-face instruction in some way. So essentially what they were doing is blended learning on this spectrum somewhere. From the book that Kurt and I edited, Ross and Gage had a really interesting quote that I think really epitomizes what we think about blended learning. And really it's that in the future, our systems are not going to be differentiated by whether they're blended or not, as much as they'll be differentiated by how we choose to blend. And so I hope that that will kind of pervade what we're, the discussion that we can have today. So the reasons for blending, the research tells us that there's 3 primary reasons why people blend: to improve the pedagogy, to increase access and flexibility, and to improve cost efficiency. And here's just a couple of examples for each of those categories. But faculty tend to care very much about the improved pedagogy. Students care a lot about the access and flexibility, as well as the pedagogy, of course. And we tend to get administrators caring a lot about the cost effectiveness aspects So if we ask ourselves what models exist for blended learning, there are lots and lots of models out there. And in fact, it's kind of hard to get you to wrap your mind around all of them once you actually start looking at them. I recently worked on an article that's going to come out in the book that Karen mentioned later this year, where we categorize the models in different ways. And I just want to put this out there as a possible way of thinking about the models. There's models that we call explore models. Those are really, if you think about scientific research, you think about someone like Darwin, who went out and explored the Galapagos and did natural history research, where he looked at what existed and categorized and defined the things that existed with the finches and others. That's a lot of what the research in blended learning is doing right now, and the models, is that it's trying to define what blended learning is and then trying to provide categories about different kinds of blends. We also have explain models that are really trying to show causality, show how one aspect of a model affects something like learning effectiveness or student satisfaction. And then we have design models, which are really trying to show how a whole course design or a whole program design can affect or impact certain outcomes. So now I'm just going to present a bunch of the different models that are out there so that you can see, so you just get exposure to them. And someone who wants to look at these more deeply can look at the references or go back and actually spend more time looking at the archive of this video. But this graph shows some blends that actually are location-based blends, where you have a classroom with an instructor and students, and then you're connecting either online with those same students outside of class, or you have students that are outside of students that are different students from the ones in class who are connecting, which is the center model here. Or you can blend by having a face-to-face class and bringing in instructors or experts from outside using online technologies. Here's an example of that that was done at BYU, where we have a class here that's taught as a normal class with an instructor and students face-to-face, but we have other students who are at a distance who are connecting via the internet to this classroom. Probably one of the most common models of blending is what we call a time-based blending model, and that's where in a class we switch back and forth between doing face-to-face activities or units and online activities and assessments. So you can see here, we may meet face-to-face here and then do a bunch of online stuff and then meet face-to-face here. Some of the most prominent models that are used out there are three that I'm going to share. Well, I'm going to share two with you, but I'm going to show you three here, just highlight three. But one are a set of models that came out of research that Twig did with the Pew research. We have some models in K-12 education that are quite recent. I'm going to share a couple of those with you. And then there are some corporate models too that are out there, and I'm not going to really focus on that today. So the Twig research looked at 30 different courses that were developed to try and improve cost efficiency at the university while also increasing learning effectiveness. And these are the models that came out of that. The supplemental model, where basically a small portion of the lecture portion of the class is kept intact, but then online supplemental materials and online materials are provided to augment that. We have the replacement model, which is basically the time-based blending that I showed you before, where you reduce some of your face-to-face class time and replace it with online activities. We have a buffet model where basically, this is very similar to Brian Beattie's HighFlex model, where the students are given multiple ways of achieving the outcomes. Those can be online or face-to-face. And students are able to choose kind of in a buffet mode what they want and what they don't want. Fourth is the Emporium model, which basically eliminates class meetings altogether. It substitutes the class time with Learning Resource Center or lab instruction that has online materials and on-demand personal assistance and tutoring kinds of experiences. And then, of course, we have fully online. Oftentimes, those bring in some kind of minimal face-to-face tutoring component. In the K-12 realm, and I know that IU has a really strong K-12 preparation program, Heather Staker and Michael Horn recently have shared some important models in this area that are kind of the de facto in the K-12 realm right now. And they frame their blended learning with a matrix like this, where on one dimension of the matrix, we have specified how content is delivered, whether it's delivered online or offline. And then on the other dimension of the graph, they have the geographic location, where the geographic location is either remote or supervised. Now, K-12 blended and online programs have a special constraint because oftentimes that supervisory aspect of the blended learning is something that we expect the K-12 schools to do, whereas in the higher ed context, we don't require that supervisory context. So here's the matrix, and they looked at dozens of different blends and mapped them all over this matrix. And then in analyzing those, categorizing those, they came up with these 4 different major categories of blends. One that's what they call the rotation model, which is a kind of time-based blend. A model they call the flex model, a self-blend model, and an enriched virtual model. I'm not going to share all of these with you today because of the time constraints that we have, but you have the references there. You can go look at them. And I'm just going to share a couple so you get a flavor of it. So if you go back here, the rotation model has several different kinds. One is the flipped classroom model, and this is quite popular in higher ed also, so I'm going to share that with you. This is a graphic showing what the flipped classroom is. Basically, we take some activities that happen in the face-to-face classroom and some activities that happen in the home or other location online, and we try and take the lecture out of the classroom and replace what's in the face-to-face part of the classroom with active problem-solving kinds of activities. And then we move the more lecture-oriented content or content acquisition activities to the online space. One thing that I don't really like about this model is that I really believe that the online activities should be as action and active oriented as the face-to-face activities, and we shouldn't just relegate, lecture and content presentation to the online space, just like we shouldn't just relegate that to the face-to-face space either. here's the flex model. As you see in the flex model, it's basically centered around lab-based classroom instruction that's individually paced. And then around this space where all of our students are working kind of in small groups or individual pacing on online learning units, we have these support units outside that allow instructors to provide just-in-time training and just-in-time instruction to students who are in need of that. So they might break students out into a breakout room and give them specific instruction on a topic that they're struggling with. Or there might be a little space where there's a science lab where the students move away from the computer-based instruction, move into the science lab and do an experiment and then go back. So this is the flex model. Name comes because the face-to-face components that support the online learning components are done in a flexible manner based on the needs of the students. So the next question that I'm going to briefly discuss are issues and challenges faced with blended instruction. There's a lot of things that I could say here. I'm just highlighting 3 that I think are critically important. The first challenge is that we need to use blended learning to make learning more active, and that's both the face-to-face and the online components. I see blended learning as a way to move us from a passive, more transmission-oriented approach to learning to a more active learning approach in the classroom and outside of the classroom. Garrison said that the real test of the blended learning is the effective integration of these 2 components, the face-to-face and internet technology, such that we're not just adding on to the existing or dominant approach or method. We're also told, Dillenberg said, our challenge is to explore ways in which tools differ, which online tools basically differ from face-to-face interactions. We don't want to try and replicate what we can do well face-to-face online. We want to find the weaknesses of what we do, what's not easy to do well online, face-to-face, and do that online. And he also says distance education environments should not be designed to imitate traditional campuses, but to exploit features that are specific to interactions at a distance. And I hope later on we'll get a chance for Kurt to talk a little bit about this, because I think this is an area that he has really pushed forward in and tried to explore a lot, is the more innovative, creative uses of the online space, not just filming lectures and putting lectures, or, replicating the lecture space online. A second challenge that instructors face is what we call a course and a half syndrome. As we move instructors from traditional teaching all face-to-face to online, one of the biggest temptations is to just add more and more online stuff without really getting rid of face-to-face components. And so a big challenge when we do blended learning is really to do more comprehensive course redesign, where we rethink our learning outcomes and we think what can be done best by a human, what can be done best with the tools that we have online, and not just add and add and add to a course, but be very careful in how we eliminate the worst of both environments and add the best of both environments. The last challenge that I just want to focus on is the need to develop blended learning models that focus more on the pedagogical dimension. One of the things that we see with a lot of these models, the ones that I've shared with you, is that they focus a lot on the physical dimension, what the classroom looks like, what the temporal, the time looks like with the blend, but they don't focus on what the teacher the pedagogies that the teacher is using. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit more with this graphic. What I've tried to do in this graphic is show how a design can be broken up into layers. This is something that I've learned from a colleague here, Andy Gibbons. There are many potential layers. I've just shown two layers here, the physical or the media layer and the pedagogical layer, which is, often deals with the method. And one of the problems with a lot of our models right now is that they really focus on that physical layer. So they're telling teachers what to do with the physical layer, but they're not helping teachers design in the pedagogical layer as much. And so when we make changes to the physical layer, we can really affect the access and cost directly, but with changes in the physical layer, it's difficult to directly impact the learning outcomes. Now, the changes in the physical layer do affect what we can do pedagogically, but it's that focus on the pedagogy that we need to pay more attention to. One more slide for you, future directions. This is really Kurt's area of strength, I think, so I hope he'll chime in this panel. But I'm just listing 3 things that I see as trends moving forward that will make blended learning environments stronger. First is we're seeing a lot of push towards the use of learning analytics that will help instructors be able to teach students better, but also allow students to be able to monitor their own learning and manage their own learning better. A second thing to look for is an increased dependence on open educational resources. We're seeing a lot of this happening with the MOOCs and with e-textbooks and those kinds of things. Then the last is to increase our emphasis on learning outcomes and competency-based learning. So I think we'll see blends that rather than focusing on the way that we get to the outcome, clearly specifying the outcome, and then letting students and faculty choose the paths to the outcome, whether it be an online path, face-to-face path, a combined path, but that the outcomes be the thing that's most important and that the path be something that can vary among the learners. So that's the brief overview. Karen, back to you.
Hey, thank you, Charles. Thank you so much. I think that we'll proceed now and see if there are any questions from our folks that are here that could be presented to Charles and to the panel. Anyone have any questions? Okay, so we're staying with our 5 general questions that we started with, it looks like. A lot of people have, a lot to learn here as I've talked to people ahead. So why don't we start maybe, everyone aware of the questions? What is blended learning? Why would we want to blend? What current blended learning models exist? What issues and challenges are faced when blending? And what are the future directions of blended learning systems? Maybe we start with Paul Graf and choose one or more of those to give your views on from your experience.
So I'll take the one with models, I'm guessing.
Okay,
what
great.
Blended models, because I'm finding in the development process of E201 and 202 courses that I developed for IU here, and I didn't mention this before, but I was at a previous institution. They didn't want to name names, but I was also an online coordinator there, and when I first began the online development, it was literally put your notes up online, and that's an online course. Having come here, I learned through Maggie Ricci at CITO, the focus was on the learning objectives. And so in developing 201 and 202 2 years ago, I focused more on the learning objectives and using online as a resource. What I've also found is that taking some of the things I learned in the online experience the activities we did, what exactly do I want to assess, I started bringing it into my traditional class. And so I am kind of moving towards that middle you described earlier there, Charles. So for me, I'm trying to figure out exactly what model works. And as I'm starting to learn here, once again, it's the students, it's their demographics, what do they want exactly? And so right now, I'm not certain what the exact model is either. All I can tell you is in the traditional sense, I'm moving a little more online. And on the online, believe it or not, I have students that still come to class. So technically, it's called an online class that I'm using, but some of my students still choose to come to class, which I find interesting because I think they never want to come. But, so in terms of the modeling, I do see something with the blending of that, with the focus on the learning objectives, and then creating activities or assessment pieces to see what they're going to see if they've attained that learning objective. What exactly that means, I don't know, except that I do some low-stakes testing online, I do some activities, and how then to check off whether or not they've actually learned an objective. I'm not there yet. So I'm just saying basically I'm moving there, but I don't know what the exact model is, but I'm getting close.
Okay, Mike?
Building off of that, a few years ago I started teaching in a team-based learning model, and so I was flipping the classroom basically, and so I had a lot of online materials, and even at that point I was asking myself, is this a blended class or not? And what happened this semester is I and one colleague were asked to go to one of these time-based blending models where we're sharing a classroom. She teaches in there on Tuesdays, I teach in there on Thursdays, and so now I'm doing team-based learning in this blended model. And it's forced me to rethink how to do this readiness assurance process where you're testing your students on their. So I'm using different online tools for that, discussions and wikis. And, so that question has really been interesting to me. What is blended learning?
And also to a lot of us.
Yeah.
I'm sure.
Kurt?
Go ahead.
Can you explain a little bit more about the team-based? You know, what exactly, because I'm just so new to this, what do you mean by that?
Well, the person who is known for kind of pioneering this is Larry Michelson. And he was here 3 years ago at one of the Center for Teaching and Learning events. And basically what it is students are asked to do all their course readings, and then when they show up in class, they take a quiz individually, and then they repeat the same exact quiz in their teams. And he's developed this model where they have scratch-offs when they take their team quiz, and they know how many guesses it takes or answers it takes until they get it right. So, and what he has found consistently through the years is that teams outperform the individuals, and so it teaches the people in the class a lot about their own teamwork skills and communication skills. And, yeah, so that's how that sets up active learning activities that follow from that.
Anybody else? Well, wait, Kurt?
I'm going to discuss the models as well, briefly, as well as why blend. I also, at some point, want to come back and share a few resources that people should be aware of. Charles, by the way, wrote the introductory chapter of this handbook of blended learning, and that's available for free. So all of you watching remotely can now access Charles's brilliant chapter 1 in that book. If you go to publicationshare.com, you can get chapter 1 and chapter 39, which is my chapter on the future. Publisher let us put them up for free. So that was nice of Wiley/Pfeiffer Publishing. And you look at 2006, because that's when that book came out. Now, Charles is working on a newer book that will be coming out later this year with Rutledge on blended learning that I had a chance to read through parts of it this past weekend. He sent me some chapters, and it's very, very good read as well, and you'll learn a lot. It's more on the research and what that has to say. I got other things to share here in a little bit, but let me go the models. Charles skimmed over, mentioned briefly the corporate models, and I think they're important because there are 3 that Alison Rozet, who was here a couple weeks ago, keynoted the IST conference. She mentions in American Management Association paper. One is called the bookend model, And the bookend model means that basically you've got online experiences happening before you meet face-to-face and online after, so that it's a bookend around you. Or you can do the opposite, have a face-to-face and at the beginning and end, which I did in my first fully online classes, but we did have first and last meeting back in 1997, I think, in that undergrad ed psych class. And so another model is the anchor model. The anchor model is where you start with what people are familiar with, and that's face-to-face, and then you move to blended, so people become a little less tense about the about the online experience because you started face-to-face and you have your kumbaya sessions to start with. The third model that's talked about in the corporate world is kind of what's called a field model. If you look carefully, it's kind of a mixed ingredients of informal and formal. Whether you're using some job aids to help people when they need it just in time, or you have some more formalistic kinds of assessments. You have to actually, I don't have time to go through the field model, but the first two are pretty simple, the bookend model and the anchor model, pretty simple models. There are many other ones out there. I will also point out that Michael Horn, who did the K-12 article, is a co-author with Clayton Christensen in that book, Disrupting Class. So you may recognize his name working with Clayton Christensen out of Harvard. That was his advisor, I think, when he was an MBA student. And he helped create the InnoSight Institute. So if you type in InnoSight Institute, you can get all 3 free reports that they've done on K-12. And those K-12 reports have a lot to say to higher ed as well, because they are the most current. The higher ed folks are talking about blended a decade or more ago, and corporates were, and it's more recent that the K-12 people have, and therefore the papers that the K-12 people are producing are more current. They have more interesting things to read about, like the rotation model and flipping the classrooms and all sorts of other things that are very much in the news every day. So Michael Horn is an interesting individual who actually, in my class last fall, he came in and talked. He started my class. I didn't even introduce the syllabus. He was the first thing. So getting into why blend, the other part of this is you can this place, this School of Ed, was designed to be a place to experiment with technology, and much of this campus as well. Whether you're in the School of Business or somewhere else teaching economics on this campus, we are charged with that. And so one is to experiment. Two is you can bring in students from remote regions of Indiana. I've had students through video conferencing in this room come from IU Northwest and Richmond and New Albany and all over. So you can extend your student population. But you also can extend the teaching population that you have and team teach with Charles and BYU or with other people around the world, or bring them in as experts and so forth. So you're extending the expertise of the class. And I brought Michael Horn into my class last semester. This coming week, I'm bringing in Jay Cross, who coined the word e-learning, and some serious gaming people from Coventry next week, and others. You can bring them in almost any time. That you want. Sometimes with just a few minutes notice, but you want to give them a few weeks notice, but and so you create a little variety with the class. You create a little more spontaneity. Also, you create this sense that it's a learning environment out there. You're not just putting up, as you said, some PowerPoints that you've scanned in and plopping them up on the web. You're really creating something that's much more elegant, hopefully, than that. And so just briefly, a couple experiences with blended. In 1997 and 96, maybe we started 96 to about 2000, we had the Interplanetary Teacher Learning Exchange called TIDAL. We had teachers, pre-service teachers in Finland, Korea, Peru, the UK, all putting case problems of their respective schools that they see during field placements, and we solved each other's online. Our students solved finished students' problems, and they got to see perspectives outside the class. They got to see other students actually read the book. When we interviewed them, they said, we look dumb to our foreign peers. Okay, that was back in the late 90s. And then in transitioning, Dr. Lehman and I did something called the Ticket Project with in-service teachers in southern Indiana, which was blended. We traveled out to the schools, did some training, and then they conversed about things. They had teams, collaborative teams, doing projects at the school, presenting to school boards, and critical friends giving feedback. Those are a couple of examples of in-service adult learners as well as pre-service teacher trainees, how we've used technology to blend. This semester, I'm teaching a class that's face-to-face and online. And if you go to my homepage under my picture, you can get the syllabus. And we're using Google Hangouts, and we're using Adobe Connect. So we have a lecture sometimes, a presentation in Adobe Connect, and then we have a chat in Google Hangouts. Problem with Google Hangouts, you're allowed only 10 people to have a chat. So we have my TA or my helper has one group, and then I have another group. But there are other ways to organize that. and you can go to Google on Air and broadcast it if you want. The problem of that is that everyone around the world can listen in, unless you privatize it somehow. So we are using Google Hangouts, we're using Adobe Connect this semester, but I've been experimenting all along. Those are a couple of things about why Blend. I do really think it enhances who you are as an instructor and makes it much more fun to teach and much more fun to learn. And I think because if you're going to have fun, I think you get more engaged and you do dive in when you see other perspectives. You actually are forced to read more and learn more than you would have just coming to hear the same lecture. So I'll stop with that. I have other things to say, but let's go on.
Okay.
Maybe people remotely have questions.
That's right.
Do we have any questions
Are there
coming
people
in remotely?
remote besides you, Charles?
I think
Or is it
Inga
just
is
Charles?
checking for questions.
Inga's checking for questions. No questions yet.
So please, I know we have people watching remotely, and send them in.
So
Charles, yeah.
let me just share a couple of experiences that I have. I think one of the things that is important when we think about blended learning is I think we know very little about what our students currently do outside of class when they're learning. A typical teacher will give a student a textbook, maybe assign some readings and some homework problems in the textbook, but we don't really understand much about what the students do with that. Are they, do they go home? Are they procrastinating to the very end, skimming through, reading certain sections, not reading other things? And so it's very hard for us to have the kind of feedback we need to modify those experiences in a careful way. And one of the nice things about moving some of the outside experiences to an online space is that we can collect analytics about how students are using resources outside of class, and we can target and give help in ways that we couldn't do before. So, for example, if you're assigning students to watch some short videos or read a certain section of a text or something like that, you could actually track to see how much time students were spending doing that or whether they did it at all, and use that in some way to provide help and guidance to the students, or even to eliminate resources that are not helpful and replace them with resources that are more useful to the students. So one other experience I just wanted to share is, I did my undergraduate in electrical and computer engineering. And I think my most important learning experiences were when I was sitting in a group down in the lobby of the engineering building, and we would get copies of exams that were available, practice exams or assignments, and we'd sit down there as a group and we would work through the problems together. In essence, what we were doing is when we worked through the problems alone, there wasn't a way for us to get really good feedback or immediate feedback about how we were performing on the problems. And so as we did that as a group, we were able to kind of help each other and provide some level of feedback to each other on the problems that we were trying to figure out, the skills that we were trying to develop. And I think that this also is a model for the kind of thing that we're trying to do ideally with blended learning. It doesn't make sense to me when we flip the classroom to just take the lecture from the classroom, a 50-minute lecture or whatever, and stream it online for students to watch online so they can do stuff then face-to-face, different stuff face-to-face. It would make more sense to me to try and create that active learning experience online. Maybe give them a problem to try and solve. When they can't solve that problem or they run into a challenge, then we say, well, watch this little video vignette or read this because this will help you understand how to do it. So it provides the motivation, and they have some kind of feedback that they can get from the system that kind of drives their learning outside of class.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, okay. Actually, I have a very specific question when I came here because I don't really have any background in online learning. This is totally brand new, so I not even know if I'm in the right place. But anyhow, I have been teaching the senior level class, and actually many of our courses in our discipline have group projects. So the students over the years, what they say is they know that group projects, group work, teamwork is very important for their profession. That is one quality that's often valued in the field. But they just don't like the group work. I remember the group project when I used it back 10 years ago, students really liked it because they think that that is how they pulled everything we learned in the lecture together. They got to apply it and use it, and then finally they have a product. But now what I see more and more is students get more disengaged with the project. There are some very logistic issues, and I'm sure there are others that I haven't really done the research for that, but by talking to students, some of the issues, one, is when you have 4 or 5 people, everybody's so busy, they cannot make the time to meet, to physically meet. That's a very big issue. So what I did is I reduced the group size, so require them to be 3 in a group. So it's more manageable for their time. But then the result of that is if that one person doesn't come to class once or twice, and then the group cannot really function very well either. So that's one big part of it. And then what it comes to is supposed to be a semester-long project. So I said, okay, I'll give you class time to do the group work so that you will have time to share and then reduce the time you have to meet outside the class. But then I designate 15, 20 minutes, but then students get distracted. They feel like they can't really do actual thinking during that short period of time, so they don't really use that time very efficiently, effectively anyway. So if I ask them to ask me feedback, I thought that I would walk around all different groups and to say, oh, this is a good time, you can ask me questions. But then they haven't really prepared for anything like this. They haven't really worked on this yet. So oftentimes it ended up as I want them to be able to do this throughout the semester so they don't have to wait until the final day to say, okay, the night before, say, okay, what are we going to do for this project? So it turns out mostly students will have to wait until the very end because the group didn't work, or ended up one person did a group project for everyone because there are others who didn't. So I really believe in the project is still a very good opportunity, the group work, where students can really work together, figure out, really learn. But then I just really can't really manage. I think when I talked to Lisa Huber, and she was saying it's more like a project management. So I was thinking about if there's any models out there that can help to do this hybrid, the blend, where students can still do most of the learning, a lot of the interactive learning activities, quizzing, in the classroom setting, but then somehow do these kind of projects outside of the class where we can better manage the students' progress. I heard about this software program called Canvas or something like that. So students knows who's been interacting, how they've been interacting, so I can monitor them to see, okay, because I was kind of in the blind view because I didn't know who has done what. I tell them to do it ahead of time, whether they do or not, they will turn in the drafts to me, but it wasn't really the good quality work. So I wonder if there's any kind of a model. I'm sure the school business or some have already done things similar that I can learn from.
We do a lot with group learning, that's for sure. So this was the first semester that we moved to this meeting once a week and having half the class basically online. And the culminating project in our class is a team presentation and a team written report. And frankly, just yesterday I finished the the team presentations, and they were actually of higher quality overall than what I had when we were meeting twice a week face to face. So I did kind of just interact with my teams and talk to them about that. And by and large, the way my students felt was because this was a hybrid course, they did have that time in their schedules where they could meet face to face if they wanted to. Now I went and looked at, I used Canvas this semester and looked at the course stats on there. A lot of the teams were, in fact, using Google Docs. They used wiki pages. Their approaches to how to collaborate outside of classwork, they were very diverse in what they did. But one of the things I found was very important is all along the way, there were individual things that they had to do, prove to me that they could do it, and then they had to get feedback from their teammates, usually during that online portion of the week, and then they had to, as a team, bring something into class every week. And they would get feedback from me on that work that they did as a team. Even if it didn't relate to the final project, they were still developing those teamwork skills and also the course, the skills required in the course.
Do you think that, because I also, when I did the face-to-face, I also required the students to bring me drafts, bring me ideas, by this week, by this, so I tell them to be along the line, do those things. But then what I found is they just kind of have a draft, kind of a placeholder right there, but then next week they might change to a different idea, they might, they forgot what they did. So do you find that when you do it this online in this way, the quality will be better throughout the whole process?
I felt that way this semester. But I tend to think not in a complete draft of the final project. I tend to think of where should you be right now, and this piece of it ought to be really good at such and such date in the course.
Yeah.
And that's how I kind of went and planned the semester around those kinds of expectations.
I have a couple of research papers we did at the School of Business on case learning and teaming and things like that. If you send me an email, I'll send you those.
That'd be great.
I wrote down 8 little tips real quick. One is, I didn't have, you mentioned it as number 8, and I was using Canvas, and you mentioned using Google Documents or Wiki Spaces, a shared space for that teaming to occur. We use wikis a lot for that to occur, and you can check in on them if it's public or if it's semi-private for your class only. You can give them some feedbacks in there. But the other 7 are not technology-based at all. I mean, they are wrapped around this. And that is to bring back prior students that can serve as mentors and guides to the teams. And number 2, they can also give testimonials of what happened last semester and when they got bogged down, when things didn't work, so students become meta-aware of the problems that teams could face and advice that they could give on how to work around that. You can also then save the best practice examples from those previous groups and make them available. And as you do that, you're also going to create job aids or scaffolds for your students because you know what didn't work previously. When Nari Kim and I, who's now up at Oshkosh, I was presenting to her class earlier this week online, but when we were talking about doing wikis and wiki-based research, it didn't work that well the first semester, but then the second semester we just created guides, and we did cross-cultural things between China and Taiwan and Indiana State and University of Houston and other places. So Nari and I and another former student, Mimi Lee, we did learn from the mistakes we made. You're learning from your mistakes, and so planning more job aids, but don't just rely on that. Rely on prior students, rely on the teams themselves to organize, get testimonials, best examples, and then you have management, and you can reform. If it's still not working after all the things you plan way ahead, and you have these drafts to a different point. If it's still not working, you give some management. You work with the groups that way, and if there's someone who's slacking off and 2 people are, you put them in a group where they can be active, and the people who aren't participating are going to lose their points. So there are ways to work around that too.
Yeah, that's what I was doing that, in the classroom setting. I think that I'm hoping that with the online portion of that is basically, I understand that a lot of students have to work outside the classroom, so it's difficult for them to meet physically. But I'm hoping that the online portion of it can really give them a tool, kind of give them a flexible schedule time where they can do their part, fair share of the work, contributing, and then don't be left out. Because the way that it is right now is in the classroom setting. If they miss out in a couple weeks, then they feel discouraged. They feel like, oh, they're behind, and they didn't want to join the group, and then they get, so more barriers for them to be engaged. I'm hoping that this online version of something, and then that they can, do it, and maybe they couldn't do their part right at 5 o'clock today, maybe at 10 o'clock they can do it, so they can still contribute and then communicate with the group in a reasonable amount of time.
And keep in mind, some of these things that we talk about might be supplementing the class. Charles might want to comment on this too, and you've got covered too, but these might be just considered add-on. There's definitions of blended where 20% or more of the class is online, or 30% or more they consider to be blended. This might be supplement if you're only using a tool, one tool here or that. I don't make that distinction personally. I'm more broad in my definition of what is blended, but we could go on and on about that if you want to add.
Oh, and this is more about the teamwork. I think another thing that's very important when you're trying to use this collaborative model is that teams actually are gauging how effective they are as a team.
Right.
And you might have to come back to that several times in the semester, and kind of they have to do a self-assess. How are we doing as a team? And can we trust each other? I think that's really important. And you can do that online.
Charles has a comment.
Yeah, I was just going to say my experience with trying to do teamwork in classes or group work, the two reasons why students don't or say they don't like it, the first is the flexibility issue, right? They're saying it's hard for us to get together, to coordinate our schedules, etc. The second reason is for assessment. They're worried about being assessed based on the performance of their peers. And I think that blended learning can really the online learning portion of a course can really help with that first one, especially because it can provide the flexibility. Like Michael said, if you're doing time-based blending and they meet one of the scheduled days for regular instruction with the instructor, but the other scheduled day they're not meeting with the instructor, they have that time blocked off in their schedule. So that time could become a time when they work face-to-face with their team if they want. They can't say, I don't have I don't have a time that we can all do it, because that time's been blocked off in the university schedule for them. The other thing is that there's opportunities for them to work asynchronously, and to do some things asynchronously, and that can be really helpful too. I loved how Michael was saying that he let the teams choose the tools and the pathways that were most efficient for them. So some use Google Docs and some use a wiki, and others, the teams I've found that the youth at our school are coming in with quite a few technology skills and tools that they've already used and know about, and they have that ability to say, hey, let's just go do this in Google Docs, or let's do this in some other tool, and giving them that freedom, I think, is helpful too, because they use those tools for their work in other courses and in other places.
I'm going back to.
We have questions on the book. 2 questions.
Do you have any experience with doing face-to-face through technology so that they have teams but in separate places? I do language learning for less commonly taught languages, and if you have, usually it would be more common to have people in different places learning from each other. And I'd be very interested in what you can do with a team that are all in 3 or 4 different locations, and just a small team, 2 or 4 people. Do you have any experience in that?
Well, the only thing I'm trying this semester, I teach large classroom settings on campus here. I try to institute some of that collaborative learning in the classroom, so I actually put them in groups of 5 or 6, that's at about 60 groups running. The only problem there was the infamous time constraint, because by the time you get them down, you kind of sit down, you don't know how much to judge, and so I'm finding I have to reconvene that, and again, moving more towards a blended learning model where I need to take away from the instruction piece and provide them enough resources to work in that group. But once they get the time to sit down and work together, it does seem to work. But right now, I'm just running into a time constraint. So I think it can be done, is my point, in that you can set up these organizations in a large classroom setting, 7-foot or tall, and put them in groups. Mine are typically groups of 5 or so, and let them go out and I have myself and the assistants going out helping them out. But you've got to give them enough time in a traditional setting, because then they got to go to the next class, or there's confusion, and if one doesn't know, then it's possible others
But they're
don't.
still all in one room.
Yes,
right.
they're still in the same room. We're all
I'm
together.
talking about people who are in different cities and different states or countries. Okay.
I know,
You know, via Skype or something.
Kurt, you've had experience with that. I've had one, but
You said saying that they're doing teams in a city in Germany.
Right. If you get somebody, a group of people who are interested in Tajik or Gujarati or Azerbaijani, you're lucky to find 4 people in the United States who are interested in that. And so they're all going to be in different locations, and how could you build a team so that they have some face-to-face time? Is that possible? Have you any experience?
Well, what you can do is you can say, if you're going to have teams of 4, you can make certain resources available for team member number 1, team member number 2, team member number 3, team member number 4. It's just called jigsawing it. And so you've allocated, and you give each person enough stuff that they have to become an expert at one aspect of that. And so when they form as a team in Skype, each one has done a different piece of an assignment, and they have to work on their respective expertises and bring that together. Another thing you can do is something called the numbered heads together, where every person in the respective team gets a number, and you can say team 1 in Germany, there's 4 you've experts in different cities in Germany, I want to hear from team member number 1 or number 3 within a team, and group 2, I want to hear from team member number 4. So they don't know who you're going to call on within the respective teams. They all have to contribute, to all be part of the process and know what their respective groups have said. So it's kind of notion of catching them off guard. So I've done this in Indiana, where I've had Indianapolis, Chicago area people,
Yes.
South Bend, Richmond, and I'd have a team at each location through video conferencing like this. I'd say, okay, team South Bend, team number
But at each
3.
location you have multiple people.
But in that case, I have multiple people. But we've also done it where I've had one-offs at different locations, and I try and pair them out. But it can become, if you're all in a Skype together, or all in a video conference together, you have to have different sites mute their microphones. So that the respective team, where you have a larger sample, let's say you have the Bloomington students that has a larger sample, a group, but then you have some remote people coming in from one-off places, you have them leave their mics open and talk to one another, while the people who might be local, a larger group, mutes their mic and works together. And so that's one way of working around that site. Something I've done.
And at one point Charles was raising his hand.
Charles?
Do you have a comment, Charles?
Yeah, I was just wondering, is the purpose of the groups, is it language learning that you're talking about?
Right.
Or is it
Language acquisition?
Okay, so I mean, one of the things it seems like in language learning, one of the reasons why you want the synchronous communication is because you're trying to get them to be able to produce language as well as to understand language.
We have to
Correct?
build some kind of community, and the question is, can we do that over when they're in different places? And that's what I'm asking.
So BYU Idaho is doing an interesting thing with language learning right now, where they actually have volunteer tutors that are in Idaho, and they have people from around the world who are trying to get their English skills up to the level to be able to be admitted to the institution. And these volunteers set up times each week. They connect with people for times each week to engage in talking activities, and they have tasks around those talking activities, which would.
And is that basically binary between 2 people, or is that 3 or more people?
It's between 2 people, but you could it'd be a little logistically a little more complex, but you could do the same thing using a Google Hangouts or even Skype, which allows multiple people to converse together. One other idea that I had about this is something that was tried at BYU Hawaii. BYU Hawaii has they service the whole Pacific Rim, so they have people from the islands that are coming in that don't speak English. They have people from China, from Japan, all of the Asian countries that want to go to BYU Hawaii, and many of them don't have the language skills that they need, and many of them are living in places where synchronous video connections are not very good. So trying to do a Skype with someone on one of the islands might be difficult. And they used the asynchronous video capabilities. They were using Canvas, but there are other tools that have the asynchronous video capabilities too, which basically allow you to do kind of like an email back and forth or a discussion board, but instead of posting in text, they're actually posting a video up. So you might ask, if you think of the discussion board metaphor, you go into the discussion board in Canvas, the teacher might post a question or the group leader might post a question in video, record the video, post it up, and then the teammates would come in, an hour later or whatever, watch the video, which is requiring them to do, to get the comprehensible input, and then make their own post and post it back. So it extends the communication out, so you don't have the quick back and forth that we have now, but especially for language learners that are at the early stages, and still gives them opportunity to acquire that comprehensible input as well as the production of language.
And that's especially helpful when they're in different parts of the world and 12 hours apart. And so we have what we call a language portal that has that one-way communication between instructor and students. But we're frustrated by is building a community that's more Skype-like and gets away from the one-way communication and hopefully has multiple communications like the examples you guys were talking about.
I think Google Hangouts is a solution for that.
There's great things for synchronous communication. The Skype-like, but I don't know that, at least what I'm thinking of with the asynchronous video, it's not one-way communication. You could create, just like you create a discussion board space in a course where a group of 5 or 6 people can go in and, contribute to a team's discussion around a topic. You can do the same thing with video. So all 5 of those people are communicating with each other. They're just doing it asynchronously. They're instead of typing, they click a button that records their video post. They say save. The next person comes in maybe 12 hours later or 3 hours later or whatever.
Right. Mm-hmm. Which is the email nature you were talking about. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it's not one-to-one. It's just it's spread out in time.
Correct.
But I think experimenting with Google Hangouts might be part of the solution too. We haven't had people on islands yet with it, but it seems pretty robust, and it's the video capabilities are tremendous. I've been in hotel rooms talking to my students late at night. They're in China and Beijing, and they're in Cyprus, and and they're all coming in with full motion, and their audio's great. we've got language ed people over here who probably nodding their heads. They probably have 5 times as many answers as what Charles and I have provided. Do you guys want to chime in here?
I use Google Hangouts to collaborate with my Albanian colleagues, and they can actually put it on their mobile phones, and then when their regular internet access isn't working, they can still connect over their mobiles. And so when one of them was in Greece, actually, and one of them was in Serbia, and my colleague was in Nashville and I was here, we were all in Google Hangout at the same time collaborating.
But the only problem for Google Hangout is that you can have only maximum of 9 people together. So if you have more than 9 people, then you cannot do it. That's the maximum for
9 or 10, something like that.
Yeah.
10 counting you.
Okay. Yeah.
And we were talking about the other thing is voice thread. Voice thread, it's just like a voice recording, and so you don't have the limits of the 12 hours apart because one student can record, and about 12 hours later, another student coming can still hear it. And the whole thing is you have the records from the very beginning to the end, so you can listen to the differences. Yeah. You can know the differences between them.
That's great.
Yeah. I think playing on what Charles has said too is the learning analytics that come through this voice thread as well too, is you can really see where the interactions are, who picks up on which parts of the conversation.
Yeah, and you can watch the same thing in Google, like Google Docs will let you see the record of all the changes that were made to a document over time.
Yes.
And that plays into the group work too, because you can see exactly who has contributed what.
Right, exactly, because otherwise the team members because I tell them to come to me early on, but they wouldn't until they turn in the final project. They say, well, actually, so-and-so didn't work, so I think this way I wanted to have a way that work. I monitor everybody, so that everybody else can monitor the group effort too, right? Yeah.
And it's surprising what, I'm sure there's islands that access is difficult, but we've had very good Skype reception in Tajikistan, Afghanistan. Of course, there's lots of places in these countries where that just doesn't exist. But the people who are interacting with us have it on a regular basis, and that's encouraging.
That's great.
So I think this also applies to if we want to create online degrees and where people from all over can do it, and they can still, I guess, partly applies to online programs that have students from all over the country or all over the world. Not just, I'm saying that not necessarily just language learning, but probably other kind of programs too.
I've got a question, or to throw out a scenario or a situation and get your all input on it. Years ago, I worked with a kind of, I might call it a hybrid, within an MBA program. But essentially what they were doing was they were back on the old iHeads network, for those of you who knew iHeads, and it was 2 hours live video, satellite uplink. And what they were doing was they were shifting, because of the cost of that satellite uplink, they were shifting from 3 hours on satellite video to 2 hours and then 1 hour online. So it was still kind of getting at it in a different situation, still getting at this hybrid. But back then, what we were starting to notice and struggle with was students valuing the different types of interactions at different levels. In this situation, in a couple of different classes, we noticed people starting that seemed to value the traditional class time, even though traditional class was video-based. But they were valuing that more traditional format more so than the online. And we were trying to work out ways that we would integrate the different activities, the online and the live together better. But we still started seeing differences in how students reacted and valued it, and how much commitment and time they put into the work there. And I was wondering if you've all experienced those types of situations in hybrid or blended classes, and what types of things we might be able to do to encourage a little bit more of a balance in terms of how much the students value. And Paul, I particularly would like to hear your input on that, because I know that your classes are weighted heavily online, but you've also said that you're starting to see students kind of show up in the face-to-face sections. And so I'm wondering about it, is it familiarity, is it value, and how do we start to look for a little equilibrium on that?
Sure. Just recently this semester, right before coming to the panel here this week, I polled some of the students and got some decent responses. The ones that had showed up, part of them just liked that structure, I think. So I think ultimately we're getting down to kind of like a preference in terms of the students will start and prefer that it's familiar, I guess is my point with that. In the beginning of the semester, this has happened all the time that I've taught online classes. There's a significant number of students that show up in the beginning, but then as they realize the resources available to them outside, and maybe part of it's the 8 o'clockness of it. I do the one that this is 8 o'clock in the morning, so I noticed the drop off very quickly this semester.
That's strategic.
And I even brought some email suggestions, again, that the students were kind enough to share, and it was that convenience factor Charles had mentioned earlier, where it's just, I set my alarm for 8 o'clock, but I kept hitting it off, but I could always watch you live, because we had a live camera, and then it was downloaded as well. But the students that kept showing up, again, I was intrigued as well, because I kept thinking to myself, you can watch this. Why are you coming here? And one of the responses was they preferred that interaction. And again, I think it's still a minority part with that. Most prefer to do it online, just watch me from a distance, if at all. And the other one did like that structure because he said, well, I'm up at 8 o'clock anyways, I might as well come. So I think it ultimately comes down to student preference, but given the choice, I think more of them do prefer the online portion of it with the option to go. And again, obviously around exam times, I would see more of them show up. I don't know why there. Maybe it was guilt or concerns or something, but you see a little surge. And then, like I said, just I would say about 10%, if I were to throw out numbers, 10% would be there on a regular basis. Closer to exam times, closer to 20%. So, but in terms of previous semesters, because I haven't done an overall evaluation, when I said, did you like this class and how many online classes have you taken, what struck me as kind of odd was that there were some students, I'd say a good 20, 30%, that said, this is my first online class and I will never do this again. Because I think, again, all the responsibility, at least in terms of a mostly online course, falls to the student, and they lose sight of that structure. Or even one of my students emailed and said, love it online, however, I never read the chapter until before the assessment's due. I keep promising myself, and because they have the time to do that when we have, because the class is still structured, there's time set aside, but there's still some people that wait to the end, even on the individual pieces. So I think ultimately it does come down to student preference, and I don't know how to, as an instructor, to say, okay, you're probably better suited for online environment, and you are more in the traditional or somewhere in between.
Could you do some kind of online quiz, pop quiz, that would allow them kind of a kick in the pants online, and say, look, you really should be keeping up here, even though the test is 3 weeks away?
Correct. I do actually have weekly quizzes that are there, and they're structured. And again, in this group, what's surprising this semester, and again, it's the first time we've done it in traditional semester mode, was the number of students completing it. And again, it's kind of hard to compare versus the traditional classes I'm teaching right now, but the percentage are over 90%. So they know the deadlines. They're still doing it, but as the one student said, she's still finding she's cramming right before it. In terms of surprise ones, no. I just basically give them the whole syllabus, everything's structured, it's loaded up, ready to go. And so they know that these small assessment pieces are built in, and then the exam comes a couple weeks later. So I try to keep that encouragement and try to keep them on track, knowing that there are a lot of students out there that say, oh, it's 8 o'clock, I don't have to go, great, I'll just do it later on, don't worry, I'll watch the video, I'll do it later. But I still put in these strict assessment pieces to make sure they're on track. And so that way they can at least assess it. But nothing popped, nothing surprised in the sense of they're going to be aware, they're not aware to keep them on track in that.
Yeah. You could even have a pop quiz that say you have to turn this in within 24 hours for those who are, 12 hours distant from us.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I never thought of it that way.
I think that one of the things I noticed is that it's kind of variety is the spice of life. I guess two things. If the online and the in-class portions are very integrated, so you need to do the online portion and the in-class portion, and they all kind of swirl together, the more I found my students pay attention to both pieces. But the other is about variety and avoiding just a routine. So some weeks maybe they have to do a discussion online. Some weeks they have to contribute to a wiki and they have to build off of each other, almost like a conversation. Some weeks they have to build an infographic. Just whatever. So I try to do something a little bit different every week, and it seems like the students engage them. But the integration with the incorporation where things all swirl together is really important.
The variety does help. I've flipped this semester. Started with Google Hangouts, then went to Adobe Connect, and I've been going back and forth, but I'm actually working on a book called Tech Variety on motivation retention online. I'm on activity number 100 of 100 since the fall semester started. I haven't had a chance to get back to it, so I'm on the final activity for the last 7 months. It's driving me crazy. But I plan to give that book away for free, so if anyone wants a chapter, I can give you most of the chapters as drafts. They still have to be copy edited, but the Tech Variety model is 10 principles of motivation. I won't be going through them all here, but get into feedback. So Tech Variety is tone, encouragement, curiosity, variety, autonomy, relevance, interactivity, attention, and yielding products. There's one I skipped. But so we're going through those, and we'll have 10 examples for each of the 10 principles of motivation, or 100 ways to motivate students in online environments.
And we could just email you and
sure, I'll be happy
share.
to send you the feedback chapter, the autonomy chapter, the meaningful relevance chapter, the goal setting one, any of those. But you can ways to get at your earlier question. Self-testing is one thing. Surprise testing is another. This week I just sent my students watching online, I just sent them the stats in on-course of how much they participate. I thought, they're going to be mad. I was pointing, and then they were very grateful to get that. They would go, I didn't realize I haven't been participating for a couple of weeks. They were kind of, they claimed to be shocked. But no, I think they generally were, and so they were appreciative. I remember back teaching adult teachers with Lee Eman back in the late, from 98 to 2003, and the first time we did this, in Southern Indiana, Central Indiana teachers, we told our grad assistant, Emily Hickson, and we also had Lisa Yamagata Lynch and John Keller in that, but we told Emily, said, Emily, can you send the reminders to all these teachers about what this come and do? And because they're going to hate us if we send the reminders, and you're just the GA. The end of the semester came around, they hated us instructors, but they loved her because she sent the reminders every week when it was coming due.
She was helping.
She was helping them out. We thought they would hate those because they had, hectic schedules as full-time teachers. So one way is just a little reminder, little subtle hints and reminders. The students also like to hang. They like Google Hangouts. The disadvantage of Google Hangouts, I will point out, unless you go to Google on Air, it doesn't save, it doesn't record, so if you miss it, you miss it. Whereas Adobe Connect, you can archive it. So if you archive, if you got students in Albania or students all around the world, Google Hangouts will let you save it, and you can watch it and play it back later. That is helpful to do. Personalization is very important. Using their names is extremely important. Even in the kind of summary conversations in on-course or a Canvas, just pulling out names of what so-and-so said and quoting them. And when they show up for the synchronous session, to mention and say hi, and just caring about the person that's there, not just about the content that you're trying to deliver, is one way for the retention to happen. Just early social icebreakers, what are you committing to in this class? What do you plan to do? And if they've posted their commitments, their expectations, they're less likely to drop because all their peers have read what they've committed to. And so if they've committed to doing this, this, and that, this with adult students, I'm talking not necessarily undergrad, but returning adults, they've set goals up by having those expectations. They've set goals up by having those commitments. So even while we say these social icebreakers are not focused on content, I went from 30% drops in 1997 to 1999 having no drops by adding social icebreakers. So the social side is extremely important. And going back to the military research we did with the Army, they found 30% of online was social in nature, social interaction. They were happy with that because in face-to-face classes, they had about 30% being social in nature too. So a lot of people are looking at online as, we're not on task enough and all this stuff, but actually I built tools in the late 90s and Charles helped me build them to get people off task. We were building tools because the more off task they are, the more they learn their husband's a truck driver and they only can go on late at night because that's the only time the kids are in bed. The more you learn about one another, the more you have mutual knowledge, the more you have intersubjectivity. So these off-task things are actually very important for success. That's the first principle of the 10 principles of motivating online. And I'm happy to send me emails. We haven't gotten any questions from the outside. Again, that email is ic@gmail.com. ic@gmail.com.
Can I ask a question just for the rest of everyone here? We talk about all these extra activities you can do online. Where do you draw the line, I guess, in terms of, you talk about variety. And so I worry about, okay, I want to do this and I want to do that. I mean, do you have to substitute something out in place of that then?
Charles was getting at that early on about that second issue, right, with blended learning, adding too much. So what happens?
Course and a half.
Yeah.
Course and a half syndrome. Typically, we see this very commonly with faculty who are teaching fully face-to-face and then try and move into a blended context without, completely redesigning. They just add more and add more and add more without really taking away anything. So, what was your question, though, specifically?
Well, just in terms of if you want to do something online, then, like you're saying, you don't want to just keep adding and adding. You have to obviously take something away, because I keep hearing about just the variety and whatnot, and that's some of the things I'm trying to struggle with in terms of, okay, I want to do this, and I'm having to do group assignments, and I'm having to do a few more, and then do I still keep the quizzes? And I'm not quite sure in terms of I want to keep adding how much you take out. Is it like literally 1-to-1? Is it, if you're going to add variety, do you then discount some other things? And so I'm just trying to find a hard time to capture different aspects of different learners and give them variety, so it's not the same quiz every week or whatever that I'm trying to do. But then do I take something away? So I'm just having a hard time struggling with in terms of if I want to add variety, what do I take away?
Charles, you try first, and I've got something to add to it. So
okay, I was just going to say the thing that I love about your question is that is where the expertise of a teacher comes in. You develop expertise. You know the students that you're going to be dealing with. You know the context. You know the activities. And that I don't think that's something that we can automate or stick into a model. You're the one that has to do the hard work, or I'm the one that has to do the hard work of looking at the activities and selecting the activities that I think are going to be best. And one other thing before I turn the thing over to Kurt, this is one of the things that I like about thinking of your class as kind of like a design-based research project, because you create this design that involves lots and lots of different components, and instead of with having a control and the place where you're doing the changes to the course, instead of having that kind of comparison with your design-based approach, really what you're doing is you have this course with all these components, and you say, these things didn't work. Next time, I'm going to change these things up, and I'm actually going to compare to what I did last time. And it's a great way to, iterate and make improvements on your course over time.
We're getting.
I'll give a couple quick things here.
I wanted to thank Charles, and then I wanted to turn it over to Kurt because I think you
should thank
something.
Charles.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We have a couple of books to give away to where are you from originally? China?
China.
Okay, I have a book for you, and the gentleman here, I'll give you each a book. The first time I taught online in 97, 98, I had 4 assignments, and again, my students loved Emily Hickson's feedback and so forth. They hated me, and I decided next time around, instead of 4 assignments, I give them 10. They pick any 4. Then they love me. So having choice and options is extremely important. So it's not a 1-to-1. You don't put one thing in and take the. I'd be a hypocrite because I have a 75-page syllabus right now that needs to be trimmed down.
Oh, 75?
So
I lived through 86 pages.
All right. So you get the T-shirt that I survived that looks on like
Who knows how many Charles lived through?
Yeah.
It was probably
Charles-
150 at that time.
Charles is grading it with me. So
Can I say something about Kurt's idea too? It's also helpful, I think, instead of just giving him 10 ideas and saying pick 4, sometimes it's good to give them some recommendations, because the more advanced learners are going to be able to select very well. The learners who are not as advanced can just be overwhelmed. So if you say, this is what I recommend for people, but I've got these 6 other options, and if you want to explore some of these other options, go for it. I'd love you to. But then the people who are the kind of the early on learners don't get overwhelmed by having just a bazillion options.
And the examples that you can post, and the testimonials can help too. Bringing prior students back to say what worked and what didn't. All those things can help people make sense of the structure of the syllabus. What I try and do is have 6 main articles to read, and they pick 3 or 4 every week. So they have options even in the main articles. They have options in the tidbits and other things that go in. But I have assignment options too. But even this semester, the final option of, I made 2 open-ended, and I need to give more on that. I have one that's just kind of letting them really pick and choose, but they do need guidance. Some do need some guidance coming in remotely, and so you're constantly playing with that notion. You're kind of feeling that overwhelmingness sometimes, and find that balance. That's the art of teaching, as Charles says, and we are more artists in creating a palette with learning environments as we move online. That's fun. I consider myself a concierge, and here's some stuff. I'm a course concierge, if you will, and a curator. You're a curator of knowledge, a cultivator of that information. Those C words come out. But I think in particular concierge is a viable one here as we move forward.
That's one thing, too. The other thing that I would always say, be aware of, I always think in terms of backwards course design. What do I need my students to be able to do at the end of a particular section of the course? And as long as I really keep my eye on that, I feel like I can give them enough options that they can make their way towards those objectives. That's all.
Yeah. And just yesterday, the Chronicle of Higher Ed had an article talking about San Jose State University looking at the flipping classrooms, using MOOC kind of videos from MIT and having 2 face-to-face classes and one that just watched the videos and had other things wrapped around it. And they're going to put this all in the new Center for Excellence in Adaptive and Blended Learning. And so they're creating a new system. This blended learning term is used a lot, and people have been doing this for decades. I brought this book by Charles Wiedemeyer called Learning at the Back Door, which came out in '81. He was doing blended learning in the '50s with TV stuff and correspondence. So this term or type of stuff has been around, but it's popular today, very popular, as people are embracing the possibilities for online that are changing people's lives. And